I'm Ira Winderman, South Florida Sun Sentinel. He over there is Kurt Helin, very early in the morning, 6 a.m. on the West Coast in Los Angeles from NBCSports.com and Pro Basketball Talk. First of all, stay safe today, folks. The fortunate part is there is a podcast, so if you're missing this live, Big O will have it posted on all the Big O Show podcast outlets, so you can get caught up with us a little bit later. Safety first. But if you want a little entertainment, a little respite from the wind, from the flooding, and from the rain, Kurt and I are here to do that for the next hour on our RedRecover.com Inside the Paint Show. Kurt, this is the first time I've spoken to you since it got real. To me, I always call this the kumbaya part of the NBA season. Yes. Everything is great. Everyone loves their teammates. Everyone's in a great situation. So I'm going to throw it to you because you follow the entire league. Should we believe everything, Kurt? Should we believe nothing?
First off, I'm mildly disappointed that you don't have Jimmy Butler's hair. Like I thought you were going to have a new hairstyle for the
Kurt, what I learned is this.
Inside the Paint this week.
In order to have extensions, you have to have something to tie it to. So right there, that's where I got in trouble. And I think you can relate, but go ahead, my friend.
I can. No, I look, nothing before everything. I mean, it's not, look, there are some things that are real. Zion walks in the room, you're like, hey, man, he's lost weight. Like some things are, now what that means, we'll see. Like there are some things that are real, but by and large, this is, I mean, I'll use the example for where I was on media day. I went to the Lakers media day and dude, everything's fine. I don't know why anybody thinks there's a problem. They're all going to get along great. Like that's just how media day is. So I'm much more of the belief that you take little to nothing out of media day than too much.
Yeah, I mean, look, down here, I'm in the Bahamas right now at the Heat, in Nassau at the Baha Mar Resort. The Heat we have a power forward. We just haven't decided who it is. We know our lineup. We'll let you know at a later date. You have that here.
Yeah.
I saw your press conferences. Russell Westbrook loves the Lakers, expects to be there the entire season.
Yes.
Rob Pelinka loves him. Darvin Ham loves him, and that's going to go on. Go out to Indiana. Miles Turner, I am not talking about trades anymore the rest of the season.
Yes.
This is the last I talk about it. Until I talk about it. Yeah. How long does this last, Kurt? Is this a one-week phenomenon? Is this, hey, the games don't matter in the preseason, so everyone can be happy, the minutes don't matter, no one wants to play anyway? When does the second degree of churn, do you think, start when we can get a much better read on who and what and where actually will happen this season?
It kind of depends on the team a little bit because some teams you're going to get a couple weeks into the season before you're like, I'm not sold on this, where I think there are a few teams where we're pretty quickly going to be, I don't know if we'll get completely out of the preseason with one or two teams, maybe Indiana before. Yeah, if Miles Turner doesn't think his name is coming up in a trade discussion in the next 3 weeks, I think that there's some teams that it's not going to last very long. The Lakers, by the way, I think are one of them because are they starting Russell Westbrook or are they starting, either Kendrick Nunn or Dennis Schroeder when he shows up? Some of these teams, this feeling doesn't last more than a week and a half. And some teams, it kind of carries for a while. Like if you're a decent team, if you're the Warriors and you do have some questions, yeah, I got some questions, but they're going to be a good space. They're going to be a good space through Christmas. Like adversity will hit them at some point, but
right.
Yeah, when?
And we will be breaking down much more of the Heat stuff as we get later in the show. I've been over at the Grand Ballroom here at their ballroom courts. I don't know what's going on, but you know what? The Heat are such a sort of comeback team. They don't need that kind of training camp venue where they can be hard at it in 2-a-days anyway. We'll get to the Heat in a while. I want to go back to something in our crosstalk before our show started. I was sort of chiding Big O a little bit. He was talking about how the Heat, while they're not a contender, and then he went into reasons why they might be, Kurt and I were talking about that we both seem to agree there's a front runner in the West, clearly, the Warriors, as long as they have Draymond and Clay and Steph and hey, now maybe even Wiggins, and we'll see if Wiseman comes back. Everyone has the target. How do we beat the Warriors? And I asked Kurt this in our pre-show, and I gave him about the last 5 minutes or so to think about it, which in our business is a long time. Kurt, is there a target team in the East? In other words, if you are the Heat or another team and saying, hey, in order to get to the top, we have to be Team X. In order to be Team X, we have to take Plan A. Who to you, or is there that target team atop the Eastern Conference?
Not in a Warrior sense, not in a this team we know is going to be there at the end providing health. Like that, I don't think that, but I will say this. I personally, about 2 weeks ago, had two teams half a step ahead. You were going to have to catch Boston, Milwaukee. I don't feel that way about Boston right now for obvious reasons. I still think Milwaukee's a challenge just because they bring back continuity. They have depth. You know, we know Chris Middleton, and they have the best player on the planet in Giannis Antetokounmpo. So I think they're as close to a target as there is in the East. But they're, as you mentioned in the pre-show, you know, they had issues last year. This is not the 2017 Warriors with Kevin Durant, right? Like this is not some untouchable juggernaut. This is a beatable team, but I think they're the target now in the East.
Well, mark this down, 9:07 a.m. I agree with Kurt Helin. I think the Bucks are the clear favorites in the East, and almost by process of elimination.
Yeah.
Even before the Ime Udoka stuff, of which we still don't know what the hell went on, but it had to be pretty damn bad to be in this situation of suspended for the season. You had that Robert Williams injury, and you can talk about valuable Celtics, and clearly Jason Tatum is their best player, and Jaylen Brown is an engine to that team, and Marcus Smart is the heart of that team. But Robert Williams, when he was playing well, the Celtics were at their best. He's the defensive anchor, which is sort of odd to say when you have the defensive player of the year in Marcus Smart. So you have that knee issue that has lingered now for almost 9 months. So that's real. That's why I knocked them down a peg. I mentioned in our pre-show, I will not trust the 76ers until they can get out of the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs, which they never have with their recent incarnation, and whether I could learn to trust James Harden. So you have the questions there. The net stuff, and we'll get to this, Kyrie's still Kyrie, and I'm not sure I would ever trust that guy again. And now they're almost relying on Markieff Morris for minutes at center, which shows you how their depth sort of is upside down there also. The Heat don't have a power forward. We don't know who the third wing in the starting lineup is. But the Bucks with Giannis and his versatility, and especially against the Heat with that kind of height and size, that you have to match up with Brook Lopez, you have to match up with Giannis, plus they have the Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton factor. Yeah, I would put Milwaukee at the head of the class right now. I mean, last year, you know, there was a bit of an outlier. The Middleton injury in the playoffs, the Lopez injury during the regular season, that changed things a little bit. So when we bring it back home, Kurt, and when we talk here down in South Florida, me out in the Bahamas right now, about the Miami Heat, should the Miami Heat feel good about where they stand? Should the Miami Heat be concerned because 2/5 of their starting lineup is not determined? Or is this typically the Miami Heat? They will always good enough to be there, and we won't know until we know.
I think more the latter. Like I think that I don't want to say you don't have questions about this team, because obviously there are questions. You just mentioned 2/5 of the starting lineup is somewhat in flux, particularly the four. I think that's the question that will linger into the season until it's answered either internally by Caleb Martin or somebody, or externally with a deal. And that said, you look at the rest of this conference. Excuse me, the rest of this conference.
Yeah, the conference has me choked up also. I totally agree.
Yeah, exactly. They are absolutely in the mix. They are absolutely in that top 5. And I'm calling it a 5 with Brooklyn because maybe, like, I don't know. I don't really trust, but I don't trust Brooklyn completely. I don't know that they've got enough defense. And after last year, I don't trust teams that don't have a lot of will and fight in them, right? Like teams that you can and they didn't last year. When things got hard, they kind of didn't fight back. It's the thing I think it keeps me from liking the Lakers more. Like they're not going to, you could, Patrick Beverley literally said at the press conference, like, yeah, I wasn't worried about beating them last year because and he thought he could change that. Prove it to me. I think that any team like that, the Miami Heat are the opposite, right? That even though I've got questions at the 4 and some rotation and where stuff's completely going to fit, they're going to make it work. They are going to have will. They are going to have fight every night. They're going to win enough regular season games to put themselves in position. And then you get playoff Jimmy and this thing comes together and they're going to defend. And they are absolutely in the contender mix.
And by the way, if you're with us in our YouTube chat board, I'm keeping an eye on the comments there. I'm not addressing any Nia Long questions right now, but I do appreciate you for chiming in. I think that was C. Dalla at the start of the show here. Any basketball questions, those I will throw at Kurt.
Yeah.
Kurt, usually you and I are talking about how this time of year is everyone who wants to see what they have. They trust their roster. They love the roster. Yeah. Quote, unquote, we have enough. I get all that. We saw an interesting move yesterday by the Atlanta Hawks. This year, right now, if you avoid the luxury tax, teams are scheduled as of now to get about a $17 million payment per team for those who are not in the tax. That'll go down as more teams get under the tax. Atlanta just did that yesterday by getting under the tax with old Heat favorite, a Blazers favorite, and Clippers favorite Mo Harkless shipped off to Oklahoma City, who probably will wind up cutting him. They have too many contracts anyway, but they had the cap space to take him in. Atlanta gets under. They'll get their money, at least right now, depending on incentives for Clint Capella. Do you think this year, Kurt, because of the luxury tax avoidance, which is a big thing because there's a big payoff there, because of so many unsettled roster spots, that we might see more early season dealing? I don't think anyone would be surprised if, say, a Russell Westbrook is traded as a contract over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Do you think that might be a little bit more flux, especially because it was such a slow offseason?
Yeah, I mean, usually there's like one in the preseason, and it's more like the Mo Harkless move, right? It's more, hey, let's get under the tax and make that move. And in their case, by the way, a guy who's not really a key part of their rotation, like they didn't really give up anything. I think you are, though, and I think it's less Westbrook. I just think that with Crowder out there, and obviously we've discussed him in past weeks. Go back to the former podcast for the Red Recover Inside the Paint show. We have talked about Crowder ad nauseum, but he is going to get moved at some point. I don't know if that's not going to be into the season because there's just not a deal that they like. But you mentioned Turner, and obviously Buddy Hield is still there in Indiana. I think there's more guys likely to be moved, and I think somebody's going to go into the season. You know, we talked about how long the Kumbaya phase lasts. Some team's going to get to a week to go before the season and go, yeah, we're not there. Like, right? Somebody's going to internally come to the realization of where they are and start and get more serious about one of those trades. And I think that's what Indiana and Phoenix and a couple other teams are banking on.
And I think what's interesting there is there are some teams also that can't afford to be good. You have Utah, for example. They're collecting pieces because they're also collecting picks. And my thought is, what if Kelly Olynyk actually dares contribute, actually does something, makes some threes, does his dipsy doodle inside game, and they accidentally win a game? To me, Kurt, it all starts with Utah. They've got to get off talent. They got off Bogdanovich. He's not going to help them win. Yay. That brings them closer to the #1 lottery pick they're looking for. But they still have Conley there. They still have Jared Vanderbilt. Now they have Kelly Olynyk, who they can't flip as a single trade.
Jordan Clarkson.
And Clarkson's another guy that a bunch of people are overlooking, and he's the instant offense seemingly every team wants as the sixth man. So should we have a certain focus on Utah? And do you think right now teams are sort of doing the math, trying to get stuff on the cheap, knowing all they need to throw in is a draft choice? How many of those Utah guys? So you mentioned Clarkson. I'm going to put in Conley there. I think Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley. There's probably Kelly Olynyk, even though they just got him. There's probably 4 or 5 guys. How do you think Danny Ainge plays that? Because he's clearly shown a willingness to move guys anyway.
I think he's going to. I think there's a lot of movement coming there. Clarkson in particular, and they want to move Conley. Conley's harder just because he's making a little over 21, 22, but like he's not contributing like he was when he signed that contract. So there's some team will come for him, I think, eventually when their point guard, due to injury, whatever, their point guard situation changes. And maybe Chicago's looking around thinking, wow, we aren't going to get ball back, which is disturbing. But like if that's not good, maybe there will be some team to step forward for him. But I think you're going to see them. If one team's going to make a move before the start of the season, I bet it involves Utah and somebody, because somebody, like you said, some of these guys are very plug and play. You can Kelly Olynyk, you know what he is and you know what he can do. Jordan Clarkson fills a distinct role. These guys are guys you can just plug, and you don't have to spend a lot of time massaging what they're going to be.
And we will get to the names. There's a bunch of Heat possibility trade names. I want to handle that in our second segment. Catch that on our podcast also. I want to go to the chat board real quick, our YouTube chat board, and Jason chimes in with a couple of questions about Omar Yurtseven. By the way, Jason, that's Yurtseven with a U, not an E to start the name, but that's for another time. Spelling does not count here on RedRecover.com inside the paint. He asked about how about Omar Yurtseven at center and Bam at power forward. Omar can hit the three. He hit it at a good rate in Summer League while averaging 20 points a game there, and he can rebound. And I want to throw this to Kurt specifically because of what's going on out there with he was at Lakers Media Day. It looks initially, and it's early, that the Lakers will go big, I think, with Thomas Bryant and Anthony Davis. We were talking early in the summer in our shows, did the Lakers have a center? I sort of forgot about Thomas Bryant. Here's my question to you, Kurt. When we see teams go big, the previous biggest big tends to get passive and float to the three-point circle and shoot jumpers. And as much as Anthony Davis can hit the shot, and with his reach and his extension, probably that's an unblockable shot, isn't that a danger, whether it's an Anthony Davis or a Bam Adebayo, to let them get too comfortable and become drifters? I spoke to Bam yesterday, and I told Bam, I don't want you shooting threes for this reason. You are switching on defense anyway. You're 1-5 pick and roll, game starts, you're on the point guard. On defense, you're away from the paint. If you're also with the three-point circle, you're away from the rebounds also. Kurt, Kurt, I want to go to you because you have a very good Lakers perspective. It seems to me when you don't cast Anthony Davis at center, he floats. And is that a concern when you go big?
It is. The advantage the Lakers specifically have in this case is Thomas Bryant can shoot threes. Like, you can space the floor a little more with him. But I think you can look. I think it's a legitimate concern with Bam Adebayo. It's a legitimate concern with Karl Anthony Towns, right? If Rudy Gobert is going to be the guy in the paint in Minnesota, are you wasting maybe the best offensive center, certainly one of the best offensive centers in the league, in Karl Anthony Towns? Are you wasting his talents by not having him sometimes in the post? I think that it's going to be interesting to see how teams try to work around that. And by the way, for anybody who cares, Darvin Ham didn't talk a lot of strategy because nobody does it at Media Day. But he did talk about he called it a 1-in system, which the rest of us would call a 4-out system. Right. He wants to have somebody around the paint. He wants to keep somebody inside, and he wants to run a lot more like LeBron at the elbow stuff because LeBron's, we know when it matters in the fourth quarter, LeBron's going to be initiating the offense, but they want to try to do more stuff at the elbow, post Russ up a little more, do some stuff like that gets their stars involved in spots they can take advantage without as much physical toll early in the season.
We are on a Stay Dry Wednesday here on RedRecover.com inside the paint. And after our break, I want to go over the Heat power forward situation. Want to go over the in-house options, what they've said to this point, and then I want to run some names by Kurt because there are possibilities out there. And among those possibilities are, I think, possibly Kelly Olynyk. I think possibly Miles Turner, don't care what the Sun said. And I think Jay Crowder is going somewhere. And I think I could almost say he's probably going to go to one of his former teams because every team's one of his former teams. But more than that, Kurt knows exactly what will happen. And he's going to tell us after this break on RedRecover.com inside the paint. Ira Winderman, South Florida Sun Sentinel, here in cloudy, rainy, like everywhere at the Bahamas and Nassau Bahama Resort. Kurt Helin over there in LA at 6-something in the morning because he loves to talk basketball so much. And I think people who go to NBCSports.com and Pro Basketball Talk already know this. Kurt never sleeps. So feel free to call him or email him or text him any time of the day. He will be out there. Why? Because he keeps on track of all of these rumors. So you don't have to, and I don't have to. Kurt, you're at the plate. Here we go. Jay Crowder, Phoenix Suns, you and I have spoken here on RedRecover.com inside the paint for weeks about how Jay had been giving all these signals, like to come back to Miami, wants to keep his starting role. Can you sort of go over the situation for us in Phoenix with Cam Johnson, the lineup change? And one thing I just don't get is this. The Phoenix Suns 2 years ago were in the NBA Finals. We're right there with the Milwaukee Bucks. The Phoenix Suns last season had the best regular season record in the Eastern Conference. Why this need to change right now to take Jay Crowder, successful starter, who even the year before the Suns went to the NBA Finals, he was in the NBA Finals with the Miami Heat. Yes. Kurt, sort of summarize for us a little bit right now, what the hell is going on with Jay Crowder and the Phoenix Suns?
Yeah, there is a sense in Phoenix that they needed more shooting in the lineup. Look, there's 29 other teams that think they need more shooting in the lineup, right? Like everybody does. They felt they needed it. Cameron Johnson is a guy on the rise. He's more athletic. He's younger, but he's flat out just a better shooter. Now, he's not as good a defender. He's young. He is not as savvy. And Jay Crowder's just one of those guys that helps you win, right? Like he just finds ways to contribute as a guy in practice who pushes people, as a guy on the floor who does the little things. But they want shooting, and they think Cameron Johnson's ready for that moment. And I don't know that they said we're starting him. I think they probably politely put there's going to be a competition for the four. But he read the writing on the wall, and he's at a point in his career where he wants to be somewhere he's contending, but also contributing. And if he felt that wasn't going to happen there, it's, by the way, why some of the places that come up is, Boston comes up as a possible, hey, we'll plug him in for Gallinari. Well, he's contending, but he's back on the bench. What's his contribution? I'm not sure he wants that. If he goes to a Miami, and there's some other teams maybe where he steps in and starts and plays a big role. And I think that's going to matter to him ultimately. Like that is something he wants out of this.
And by the way, if you're with us on redrecover.com, you can go to our YouTube chat board, join the conversation. For now, we are letting Howard and Siadala describe and talk amongst themselves regarding Ime Udoka's marital or non-marital status, so you can chime in there on that. I'm going to try to keep it more basketball related here with Kurt on our main show on our YouTube page, and of course, all our Big O radio platforms. And please smash those like buttons when you see them, because if you don't, we're going to come over to your house once it stops raining. It's interesting, Kurt. When it comes to Jay, I think you hit it right on the head. People are saying there's a bunch of teams. Milwaukee's the latest team that's been mentioned for Jay Crowder. He's been there also, right? I think he was a buck at one point, wasn't he?
I just
Maybe
assumed
not,
he was
but he played at Marquette,
yeah.
so that counts him. That makes him a Milwaukee product anyway, so we'll put him in there anyway. And again, he wants to start. He still thinks even at 33, he still has it. And that's the thing for the Heat. I could throw some names at you. Caleb Martin, Haywood Highsmith, Max Strus, Nikola Jovic, Omer Yurtseven. I think without overstating things, Jay Crowder would be the better starting option than all of them. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
And let me ask you this. Let me put it another way, because then I want to go to the trade permutations, because they did speak with someone inside the Heat regarding that. It's somewhat off the record, but what the heck? It's a storm out there. We can reveal secrets here on redrecover.com inside the paint. When you look at Jay Crowder, if I were to give you, we spoke in our first segment, you can catch that in our podcast here, about whether the Heat are a contender, whether they're behind the Celtics now with their turmoil, the Bucks with their stability. How would your outlook change on the Miami Heat, Kurt Helin, if I were to tell you that the Heat, through whatever means, without losing a major core piece, added Jay Crowder as their starting power forward? How would that change you in the hierarchy with the Nets, with the Sixers, with the Celtics, with the Bucks? How would that impact things, do you think, in your view?
That's a good question. I would say it moves them up to, I don't know that I'm going to put them in front of the Bucks, but I think it moves them into that tier of teams 2 through, again, what do we think of the Nets, but 2 through 5, where like these are teams with a potential run. I think, though, Jay Crowder's the guy who helps him in that last 16 more. Like his versatility, his defense, his shooting that he still has. The Suns might want more, but he can knock down your threes. I think that the way he plays and the style he plays is look, I don't have to tell you guys, he was obviously part of the reason they were in the finals. That will matter more in those last 16 games, but I think it improves them. It makes me more confident, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like I can trust him with all due respect to Omer Yurtseven or anybody, Caleb Martin or anybody else, and Caleb played so well last year. I just trust in the big moments, Jay Crowder is going to make plays. And
you know what?
Give me that factor.
It's like what the Heat had in PJ Tucker last season, and honestly, what the Sixers have in PJ Tucker. So in other words, when we're talking about major offseason moves, even in the Eastern Conference, and obviously there were a bunch of ancillary moves the Sixers made also, but they're pointing as PJ Tucker as sort of their toughness and difference maker come playoff time, not the first 82 games. I think that's the thought with Jay. Again, we've seen him in the playoffs be an impact presence maybe last year, not as much, but he's helped his team advance deep, deep, deep into the playoffs. So I get all that. One of the questions here on the chat board is, Terry chimes in and says, do you think the Heat eventually make a move for Jay Crowder by the deadline? You see, I don't think he's going to be in Phoenix by the deadline. When you skip training camp, that's a now thing. That's by the end of the preseason, by the start of the regular season. There's going to be a ramp up, and either you're in or you're out. What I will say is this. There are easier paths for the Heat to get a Jay Crowder. The easiest is if they want to take on Duncan Robinson. But let's face it, if the Suns are extending Cam Johnson, they don't want to take on 4 more years of Duncan Robinson, I don't think also, unless maybe they get off some of their bad money. So I think that's the easy way for the Heat, the hard way to convince the Suns. There's the Tyler Hero element. I think the Suns would jump at that because that's just good young talent, and you'll deal with his extension when you have to, but you're getting a piece. There's no way in hell the Heat are doing that. So I raised the possibility of the old group package, the 3-for-1 or 4-for-1. You can do that this time of year because you can trade, you can carry up to 20 players. A lot of times during the season, Kurt, you know this, you'll see this on Pro Basketball Talk, people will suggest to you a 5-for-1 trade. And you're like, yeah, there's a roster limit. They can't do that then. That's why people love trading around the draft, in the offseason, around free agency. You can go to 20, cut to the maximum of 17, 15 on your standard roster, and make it work. So just to play the game, I threw the names by Heat people. I'm going to throw it to you also. If you were to build a package, you would start with Haywood Highsmith, which is a very good contract to trade because only $50,000 is guaranteed. You have to move the guaranteed money up a little bit to make a deal work, but that's a name. Then I just sort of threw around some other names, and I want sort of yes or no from you with some of your quick thoughts. To get Jay Crowder, Kurt Helin, would you throw in Max Strus?
That's a hard one. That's a tough one. I would say if you really want him, that's the guy, right? That's the yes you have to make, because here's the thing we haven't discussed from Phoenix's point of view. I don't want your flotsam. I am a win now team. I have, they are not looking to win in 2 years, and that's what makes this trade harder to do with not just the Heat, but with everybody.
They don't want
a
picks,
player
right?
who helps them. Yeah, they don't want your picks. They don't want your young talent. This is not Utah. I want your guys who can help me tomorrow, because I have Chris Paul's 75, 76, whatever age he is now. Like, they don't have, I mean, they've got a bridge to the future, obviously, with Devin Booker and young players, but they are still absolutely win now. They are not taking back young players. They're not just sending him out to send him out. So you have to give them something they want. Max might be that guy. Max might be the guy you have to throw in to get it done if you really want him.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts of the show. Kurt Helin, you're incredibly wrong. I don't think there's a chance in hell. I don't think there's a chance in hell the Heat part with Max Strus. I think the Heat realized they might have something special there, a multi-positional talent who can shoot and stroke it, who will be a relatively low contract, even as a free agent next summer. I think he's untouchable among the minimums, among the Heat's lower paid guys. I think when they moved off Duncan Robinson, when they took a step away from their $90 million player, that's a huge statement to me. That says they see something there. So, okay, so that's like a
by the way, credit to the
Family
Heat.
Feud. That's the first X. That's the first no. That was the wrong answer right there. But we'll move on.
By the way, I love that the Heat did
up was Gabe Vincent, and I said, would you throw Gabe Vincent in there? So, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to go back. We're moving one family down on Family Feud. We got the whole Helin family there. Maybe the next answer will come from the dog.
I'll bring the dog in.
Exactly. But right now, Kurt, would you include Gabe Vincent in such a deal?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I like Gabe. I like the way he pushes and fights through stuff. But yeah, for Jay Crowder to fill a bigger need, yes.
And you know what's amazing? That's another X and another no there, because this was interesting, Kurt. When I spoke to a Heat person, and this I really found fascinating. Again, I'm with you. I played the game. We were sitting in the media room before our interview started on Monday, and I was asked that also. And I thought, okay, God bless Gabe, but he's Gabe. And then someone made a really good point. Kyle Lowry is 36 years old, and after this season has 1 year left on his contract. Eventually, you will have to replace him to point guard. Right now, the Heat do not have another option to point guard. We go into the season. Gabe sets up as the backup point guard. Of course, Victor Oladipo or even Tyler Hero can play some point guard. But the thought was, you have a guy in your pipeline. You might be able to move up for a relatively low contract. I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so now we move down the family members, and we have the third name here that you'd have to put together as part of a package. Omar Yurtseven.
See, now I'm tempted to say no, because I was impressed with him. I was impressed with, I'm going to be wrong again. Maybe that's a big, because again, you're trying to replace like for like in a sense, if you're the Heat, right? I mean, if you're the Suns, right? I would like somebody at the 4. I would like another big. I would like somebody who spaces the floor and young. But if I'm Miami, that to me is a tough one to put in, because I was impressed with him at Summer League. I think he has the potential to have real value, and somebody you might be able to play next to Bam, because they can space the floor and do things and not just pack the paint on them, right? Like you're going to have to space the floor. So tell me I'm wrong, but I probably be hesitant to keep.
This is more of a personal thing. So I'm going to give you another X there, but it's not from the Heat itself. It's something I was thinking about. And again, I will have a new co-host next week, so please tune in then. Just kidding, I'm not as sold that the Heat are sold on Omar Yurtseven for this reason. If the Heat were sold on Omar Yurtseven, and Kurt was totally correct, Summer League 2021, Omar was, I don't care who got MVP. He was the MVP of Summer League, especially counting when they played in Sacramento also in their first California Classic Summer League, and then they went to Vegas. During last season, when Bam Adebayo was out in December through January, Omar Yurtseven had 14 straight double-digit rebounding games, had 4 straight games of 16 or more rebounds. Both were NBA records or close to NBA rookie records right there. He blew the league up. And then Bam Adebayo came back. And then Omar Yurtseven disappeared into the ether. But Kurt, more than anything, I still held out hope in the offseason. Okay, we understand that he don't play undrafted rookies. You have to earn your way in. Even Duncan Robinson did. Kendrick Nunn, yes, he started right away, but the trust had to be built through the season. And then the Heat went out and signed Dwayne Dedmon for a $4.6 million one-year contract. And I'm like, whoa. This team is worried about being into the tax. This team is worried about where it stands with its payroll. This team has a Yurtseven at the NBA minimum. I know this might sort of shock Heat fans or whatever, but I don't think the Heat are enamored enough with Omar Yurtseven. And I will say this, being facetious before, I totally agree with Kurt. And I would give Omar a greater run. And Kurt, based on what I just said, and how the Heat brought back Dwayne Dedmon instead, could this be the case of a player who could emerge as a good player, but maybe not emerge with the Heat? Because we've seen elsewhere, a guy like Hassan Whiteside had a tryout there early in his career with Sacramento, went to Memphis, but it took the Heat for him to find his stride. I know there's not a lot of Omar Yurtseven buzz, although I do know this. The Turkish version of Pro Basketball Talk does a lot on him also, when they're not talking about the legacy of Hito Turkoglu. What's your thoughts about what the NBA thinks about what Omar Yurtseven accomplished in 2021 Summer League, what he did last December, January when Bam was out? What do you think the league thinks of Omar Yurtseven?
Yeah, I think that they see potential, and I don't know that it's a fit. You kind of bring up an important thing in general around the NBA, which is unless look, it doesn't matter to Jimmy Butler, it doesn't matter to Bam, and you can pick 1 or 2 guys, maybe 3 on a couple teams. It's all about fit, right? Like at the end of the day, fit matters so much because certain guys are going to thrive in certain systems or certain situations and then not thrive in there's certain centers that you better play drop back coverage with them, right? Like I love Rudy Gobert. If you've got him up on, and he's a little different, but like if you have Brook Lopez, you're not putting him up on the ball, man. Like get him back and drop him. And you could go through this with every position. It's so much about fit. And I think that there's got to be teams that look at him and say, well, we're gonna play fast, we're gonna play up and down, we can use his shooting. They see him as a better fit with them than necessarily what he's going to be next to Bam, because obviously Bam's Bam. Like next to, maybe that doesn't fit as well in Miami. And so I think there's a lot of teams that often look at guys and think, and not just Omar, but like a lot of guys and think, hey, does his skill set plug in better with us than with them? And that's when you get the Hassan Whitesides who suddenly look better somewhere else, just in a system that works. Yeah.
And so I sort of to leave it there. First of all, if you're on our chat board, chime in. We'll do the lightning round in our final segment here of redrecover.com Inside the Paint. We now know who Kurt Helin would or would not give up for the Miami Heat to make a trade to get Jay Crowder. But after the break, because I think this name is so juicy and there is so much BS coming out of Indiana, another lose now type of team. I want to get into it with Kurt about what you would or wouldn't do for Miles Turner, because to me, that could be the perfect fit for the Miami Heat if they're willing to pay him going forward in the future and pay the price for an acquisition. So after this break on redrecover.com Inside the Paint, we'll be back to talk Miles Turner. We'll be back to take your questions on our chat board and wrap this thing up on a stay dry, stay out of the wind Wednesday morning. I'm Ira Winderman, South Florida Sun Sentinel, southfloridasunsentinel.com over here in the Bahamas with the Miami Heat at training camp where it is rainy and windy, just like at home for everyone. He's Kurt Helin at the crack of dawn out there. Kurt, is the sun up yet, or can you see out of the room where you are in LA right now?
The sun is starting to come up. It is starting to get light outside.
He is Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com. You can check him out there. Before we pick up our show here on the Inside the Paint, redrecover.com show, and you can catch our first two segments if you missed it anywhere with the Big O Show podcast, as long as you smash the like button. We'll go back to our chat board. Again, feel free to chime in. We'll get to your questions, hopefully all of them, before the end of this segment. Great or Good had a couple of questions. Mostly he's talking about how Bam and Tyler are pushing themselves to improve and expand their game. Real quickly, Kurt, that's sort of what this league is all about, isn't it? That players can't plateau, that your young players have to continue to grow. And let's say you're the Lakers and you have no young players. That's basically where the game is in a salary cap league. Wouldn't you agree with that?
It absolutely is. And I think, by the way, it's something I don't think the average fan sometimes really truly appreciates how much these guys work on their games, how on their craft, on the effort they put in to not only become good at their strengths, but in the case of Tyler, I'm sure shore up his weaknesses. I will see what he's got defensively. He came out and put on weight. These guys put incredible amounts of effort in the offseason and even during the season into their body, into their conditioning, but also into working on parts of their game. This is I don't want to say to a man, largely, they appreciate where they are. They realize how much they're getting paid, and they are realizing that they're in the top 450, and there are another 2,000 who want their gig, and it's not unless you're LeBron, man. The gap is just not that great, right? Like you got to put in the work, and the guys do. By and large, and if you don't, by the way, you wonder why some guys are out of the league in 3 years.
Yep. And you know what? And we're seeing it down here, even on our football team with the Dolphins and Tua and all the concern and the growth he's made year to year, especially now coming into this season. You have to keep picking it up. You have to be a little bit more. Man of 1,005 holds, which sounds like a lineman from my New York Giants, asked, will Duncan be a starter again, or is he forever a bench guy? Kurt, my thought is that if you earn something, it shouldn't be taken away. Max Strus, to me, appears to be the better player than Duncan. Not saying that Duncan couldn't start somewhere else. Teams are always looking for shooters. But your thoughts right now, when you, from a distant view, look at Max Strus, what he did in the playoffs, Duncan Robinson, what he didn't do, could you envision Max Strus, at least early in the season, pushing past Duncan Robinson for that starting job?
Absolutely. I think Miami and Eric Spoelstra, more than most franchises, are ruthless about that, right? Like, we are going to go with what works. We are not – hey, man, just because you got the $90 million contract does not mean you get to start in Miami. Like, you have to earn that moment. And, frankly, more teams should be that way. There's plenty of people who at least start games if they don't finish because of the contract or get chances because of the contract. Duncan's had his – I don't want to write him off. Like, he's a good player who brings the most important skill or one of the most important skills in the game to the table. But if Max isn't starting at the beginning of the season, it won't. I got a feeling by Christmas, a very good chance. Yeah.
Well, and C. Dollar points out, he says, I low feel key for Duncan Robinson that he plays better this year. Am I crazy? You know, the one thing we've all spoken to Duncan during camp, he's out of his head. I think he was in his own head last year when it went south. It really was the first time. He was sort of on this great rise up, and he sort of hit that. And that tells you who a guy is. But again, folks, Duncan Robinson is it's almost like one of those cartoons where in the Bugs Bunny cartoons, for those who go back, and the character being chased looks like a big steak and a piece of meat. He's a salary. You can almost create a meme or a GIF or, however you want to call it, where Duncan's head is a dollar sign because he's a matching salary in his contract. That's why he has in part that contract. And that's the real value he holds to the Heat, that he's that extra element you could throw into a deal, which sort of brings us to where I've been teasing for the first two segments and I want to get to right now also. And this is Dario Rangel chimes in here on our chat board. He said, every Pacers game I've watched, I see Miles Turner shoot like 6 threes and miss all of them with the requisite LOL on the bottom there. Want to bring people back into the conversation if you weren't here for our first two segments today on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. Miles Turner arrived to Indiana Pacers camp and said, I'm discussing this only once. I know I've been mentioned in trade rumors for the last 3 or 4 years. I'm not going to address it again during the season. Pacers front office have said all the right thing. He's a great soldier. We want him here. We're going to be able to work with him. All of which his code is throw us your best offer. So before I put Heat best offers out there, because Kurt failed when we tried the Jay Crowder experiment, I want to go a different way, I want to go a different way. Kurt, what are your thoughts on who Miles Turner is and how good or not good he is right now as an NBA talent, as an NBA star?
He is on the bubble of being a star to me, an all-star level player. But most importantly, we were talking about fit earlier. He's the guy who fits, I don't want to say everywhere, but almost everywhere, because he is, everybody kind of looks at what Brook Lopez does in Milwaukee and, hey, I can shoot threes. He's not really necessarily a traditional shot blocker, but like he is a big body in the paint that you've got to deal with. Miles Turner is maybe the best shot blocker in the game. Certainly one of the top, what would you say, Ira, 3-5 shot blockers in the game?
I put Gobert's length ahead of him, even if the numbers sometimes.
But one of the best shot blockers in the game. And he can shoot the three and space the floor on offense and do some stuff inside. He's a decent passer. Talk about a guy where I think he lands in the right situation, whether that's Miami or wherever. I think he's going to turn some heads somewhere where they're like, oh, wait, this guy's this good? Like, I genuinely, I'm very much in the Miles Turner is better than you think he is camp.
But that's one thing I don't get. And again, when you look at something from a distance, you get that perspective. You see the numbers, you see the possibilities. You also see the losing, and obviously someone takes the brunt for that. They shipped out Domantas Sabonis as if he was their scapegoat. They let Malcolm Brogdon go, because they felt that, hey, that wasn't the right fit. Here's my question. For all the things that Kurt Helin and Pro Basketball Talk just mentioned about Miles Turner, he can hit the three, he's versatile, he's switchable, he can block shots. Why has he been on the trade block for so long? Wouldn't that be, and folks, to bring you back into this, Miles Turner's a free agent after this year. That's part of the reason. Do you pay a player? Do you let him go? No, sort of the Heat deliberations right now with Tyler Hero's extension. But the one thing I don't get is this. Why, if someone checks all those Kurt Helin boxes, why have we heard him on the trade block? And I think you'd agree for that now, Kurt, for probably 2 or even 3 years.
Oh, at least 3. And is there a team that hasn't been mentioned as a Miles Turner destination in the last 3 years?
Like, from the Lakers, he's been mentioned a bunch out there.
Again, because he's what we were just talking about. It's about fit. You are always trying to find somebody next to Anthony Davis who doesn't clog, and especially with Russell and LeBron driving into the paint, and Russ not exactly spacing the floor, Ira. Like, you've got to find somebody who can your big has to be able to step out and at least be a threat. And that's why they're always looking for that. But they're not the only team. Memphis, like I love Jonas Valanciunas. He doesn't necessarily, he took more threes than ever last year, I think a couple a game, but like, you've really got to space the floor. If you've got Ja Morant slashing in there, Miles Turner steps in and looks better doing that. And I think you can apply that to 25 other teams. Like, he's easy to plug and play conceptually. He's making $18 million. And I think the Pacers have always thought that they were going to get more for him. But at some point, dude, you mentioned it, like, he's a free agent after this year. If you're going to move him, move him.
There's only one deal I see for the Heat. And it involves, as we mentioned before, talking about Duncan Robinson as a player or as a salary. Duncan's salary. But the only player, to me, and again, feel free, Kurt, to go through the Heat roster and their salaries or whatever, is whether you're willing to put Tyler Hero in there. And I know the Pacers have their guards. I know they went that way in the draft. We know that Halliburton right now is their star of the future. That's why they made the Domantas Sabonis deal. Obviously, Hield will be moved, older player, three-point shooter. So, and I think you're going to get this one right because there is no definitive answer. So, Kurt, first of all, I'm putting you off the hook. Unlike with Jay Crowder, we mentioned stuff. There is no right or wrong answer here. There is no X that you're correct or check mark that you're wrong. But if you're the Miami Heat, knowing what you have now, would you include, as part of a package that probably will have to include at least one draft choice, would you include Tyler Hero in a trade for Miles Turner?
Now I think you're getting too expensive because, like you said, you've got to put in Duncan. Miles Turner makes 18. You've got to get to 18. That's not going to be that simple. And I'm going to forget Tyler Hero's salary off the top of my head, but it's less than 8.
About 7 this year. Duncan's 18, so you matter. You can take some extra money back. You can float the money in the difference.
You can do some other stuff.
Close enough within the 75%.
But if you're Ira, I'll throw it back at you. Would you put Duncan Robinson, Omer Yurtseven, and maybe a pick or 2 picks, depending on what you've got to negotiate, into a deal to get Turner?
I would, but I just think Indiana's going to want more. Now, you could say, hey, that's a depreciating asset that maybe by the trade deadline, when it's only half a season of Miles Turner, you can get him on the cheap. I think Indiana's looking for something more tangible for this reason also. When you are Indiana, you're not getting free agents. For those who don't know, Indiana plays in Indianapolis. Not exactly a mecca for I've got to get there. You can, Kurt, I know you do this all the time. Maybe you can find me an NBA free agent who ran to take the money to get his bag in Indiana. I can't really recall that. They've always been a team playing on the margins of staying under the luxury tax, of being good enough to get in the playoffs, but not good enough to get anything through the playoffs, really going back to the Rick Smiths and Reggie Miller era there. And I know they had the Roy Hibbert time also when they were battling the Heat under Frank Vogel, but that's been a while now. It's been a minute since then. So I think they want something tangible. So you might say, well, wait a minute. If you trade him for Tyler Hero, they have another extension question, but it's younger. It could be more on their terms. They have his bird rights also, so they can make it work. So I think it would take at least Tyler. Yes, I think if you're asking me, would the Heat offer Omer Yurtseven and Duncan Robinson and a first-round pick and maybe a protection even on another? Sure. That also would take the Heat out of any major move going forward unless they were to trade, say, a Kyle Lowry. So it's really interesting because it's funny. I posed the question because I thought you might take it to the end of our show, but you didn't, so I'm going to have to answer it instead. It's a tough call for this reason. You're giving up some of your known future. Tyler wants to be here. You can make a deal work with his bird rights versus you acquire a Miles Turner who has no allegiance to your team. Can just go on to free agency and get the biggest bag possible. Might be willing to take it from a Sacramento because, hell, he was in Indiana, so it's not like it's coming from a big market. But here's the other part of that equation. And this goes for everything that Kurt and I have spoken about in our last hour or so coming up to here on redrecover.com inside the paint. Kyle Lowry's 36. Jimmy Butler 2 years ago turned 33. You have to live in the moment with this Miami Heat team. If I trade Tyler Hero, I still can open with the backcourt of Butler, or it's called Robinson, or whatever, or Strus, but just I could open with a perimeter rotation of Butler and Lowry. And I still would have Oladipo and Vincent in my backcourt. I could survive there, and I get my definitive starting power forward. So to go through the names I mentioned, you just say better or not better. Is Miles Turner better than Jay Crowder?
Yes.
Ooh. Okay, and I'd agree.
Yeah, I'm going to say yes. Yeah.
Long-term youth, versatility.
Yeah,
it might not be the fit. Okay.
I think the only question with Turner versus with Crowder is, again, we talked about Crowder. We know when those big moments can be there. Turner's never had to be in those moments, so we'd find out.
Better fit than Kelly Olynyk, who might be available.
Yes, he's just a better player than Kelly.
Yes, and I agree. And I love Kelly. And if they can get Kelly on the cheap, I'd be fine with that also.
Yeah.
So that's another name. Better fit than Caleb Martin, Miles Turner.
Again, just a better player. Yeah.
Yes, it's an easy one.
Again, nothing against Caleb. He's just a better player.
On down the line of other Heat options at that position. So yeah, I think that I would offer Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson's contract. The only downside of that would be this. You've played your chips. This could be a season of trades. Kevin Durant could come back on the market, but the Nets are sitting there at 15 and 25, right? You just don't know about that. John Collins could wind up being on the market if the DeJounte Murray backcourt takes all of his shots. So the bigger question to me is not would you throw Tyler Hero and Duncan's contract and the pick in for Miles Turner. So I'm going to phrase it to you this way, and I know people love trade talk. Kurt, if that's your final move, is that enough of a final move to get you past Milwaukee? Is that enough of a final move to put you in contention with Golden State?
It moves. Yes, I think it puts you closer to that level, or at least, how about this? It puts you in the conversation with them. Like, can they beat the Bucks in 7 games? Who knows? But it doesn't make them clear and away favorites. But it makes them it puts them in the conversation even without Tyler Hero, because I think you're right with Strus, with Duncan. Like, you're not that far off. Like, you're going to miss some of what Tyler brings, and Tyler again loves the culture. Like, and that's the question you've got to. The extra question you've got to ask about Miles Turner when he gets here is he's going to love Miami. Is he going to love the Heat culture? Is he going to put in that work, or is he get to be a free agent and say, man, they're not going to push me in Sacramento. I'm good. I don't know him well enough to know that answer.
And neither do I, and get his bag. But what's beautiful now is I can leave my room here in the 17th floor, go to the convention center, tell Andy Ellisberg and Pat Riley to pull the trigger. But more than that, I can self-aggregate and go to Tyler Hero and go, hey, there's this guy, Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk, who wants to be traded. So really, it all works out in my favor.
Fire away.
We're running late here on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. Want to get to a couple of quick things. Being asked right now, let me go here in Man of 1,005 Holds, ask again, who do you think is your Heat undrafted rookie G League sleeper this year? I've told people, you can read it at the Sun Sentinel, I think Haywood Highsmith is the kind of guy that the Heat are trying to groom. I could see that. T. Yan asked, who's going to score off the bench if Tyler is gone? Hey, that's why they gave Victor Oladipo that 2-year deal just in case Tyler is gone. So I think they'll take care of it. Mark chimes in and says, hey, praying for safety for everyone in Florida. And Kurt, that's what this morning is all about. We hope we've been able to entertain you for the last hour or so with Miami Heat Talk. Stay dry, stay safe, and more than that, stay with us, because we'll be back next week again. I'll be leaving the Bahamas. I think I might be in Brooklyn ahead of the Heat's exhibition game next week. Well, we'll join you, him from L.A., 6 a.m. in the morning, Kurt Helin, Pro Basketball Talk, me, Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. We'll be back at it next week on another redrecover.com Inside the Paint. But now we roll on for all your hurricane safety tips and also how he would redo the Miami Heat to Orlando Alzugaray as the Big O Show rolls on.